Once upon a time there lived a witch who slept in a forest of thorns for 1,000 years. Until one day a handsome golden-haired prince found her and woke her up with a kiss of love. The problem was that the prince was too young, which was not supposed to happen according to the story's plot. In the end, the witch simply took the young man under her wing, teaching him the craft of magic. However, after the prince turned 15, for some reason she decided to leave him. The witch fell asleep again, while the prince continued to study dark magic. After gaining great strength and power, he fought his way through thorn vines and fought monsters. The young man was ready to do anything to find a small castle with a witch. Finally, after 10 years of searching, he manages to find the sleeping witch in the dark castle. The prince was so happy that he burned down not only her former home, but the entire dark forest. In the end, he proposed to her and they lived happily ever after, walking the whole way hand in hand. After listening to the story, the girl begins to understand that it was not by chance that Cedric read it. She wants to know the truth about who the main character really was. The young man doesn't even try to hide it, because the story is not fiction at all. Just a little more and he will bring to life everything that Ariel learned from an ordinary fairy tale. He loves her so much that he wants to destroy Ariel's past to the very foundation. After all, the Emperor of Elysium is the very same prince who was raised by a witch in the past. Thus, Ariel raised a person with her own hands who became a completely different person with age. In response, the girl suggests simply saying that they love each other and want to get married. With this attitude, Cedric will definitely not be able to ensure a long and happy life. With each passing day, Ariel begins to understand that no one but Cedric will like the process. He assures us that a happy ending is entirely within his plans and that we can rely on him completely. Ariel reminds us that process is also quite important when it comes to weddings. She demands to reveal the truth if the guy is up to something stupid again. In the end, it's better to say it right now, otherwise it will be too late later. It seems that lately the girl is interested in things that she didn't care about before. He suggests just waiting a little bit to see everything with his own eyes soon. Someday this will happen and Ariel will understand who she raised in the distant past. Some things will have to be reaccustomed to, because it's not just the young emperor's appearance that has changed. Looking at him, the girl tries to understand at what point everything went wrong. Once upon a time, Ariel lived in the eastern monster forest in a rather cozy area. Everything was fine until one day the emperor entered the house to wake up the witch. Once she found herself in the outside world, she couldn't believe her own eyes. 1,000 years have passed since Ariel last visited the capital of the empire. Without even giving her a chance to get used to the new world, the emperor immediately brings her to the palace. People have learned to use magic to improve their lives, as if they had unraveled the main secret. Now they don't need to learn the basics of magic, as they did 1,000 years ago. Ariel's appearance raised many questions, although the girl herself had no fewer of them. Many could not come to terms with the fact that His Majesty brought an ordinary village girl here. She is known to be a resident of the monster forest, located somewhere on the border of the country. An ignoramus who doesn't understand the world around her at all somehow becomes the emperor's chosen one. It's impossible not to hear such conversations if your name is mentioned frequently in them. At first, Ariel seemed a little silly to everyone because of her childish questions. They said that she couldn't even read or write, to which His Majesty turned a blind eye. It's hard to imagine where the emperor brought such a stupid girl from and what he has planned this time. Every lady of the court would like to be in Ariel's place, but she was the only one who was lucky enough to be in her place. Thus, the great sorceress of the kingdom of Arendelle becomes the first lady of the empire. In the new world, the writing system has changed, so it is not entirely fair to call it illiterate. Locals should understand that the princess lived in the forest of monsters for many years. It's silly to be offended that sometimes Ariel might accidentally hurt someone. Suddenly, passers-by start talking about a book they found, written in an ancient language. Immediately after this, the book falls out of hands, as if calling its true owner. Scientists have long tried to decipher ancient writings, but have never solved the mystery. They believe that one day the ancient magic of the kingdom of Arendelle will be revealed, serving for the benefit of humanity. His Majesty did not destroy the forest for no reason, which means that research must begin immediately. Looking at the pages of the book, she begins to realize that the handwriting seems quite familiar. This is roughly what a girl looks like who wants to get back her personal diary with shameful secrets. There is no doubt that modern scholars have taken her diary for a collection of magical knowledge. In response to the strange request, the messenger asks the stranger not to block the way. If this girl was the emperor's chosen one, His Majesty has bad taste. It's unlikely that Ariel herself cares about their opinions, since her personal diary is still in someone else's hands. Besides, she is not at all a stupid country girl, as people are used to thinking of her. But how else should a princess behave when her dark past is about to be revealed? The records of the great sorceress Ashildr have fallen into the hands of strangers and will soon be deciphered. However, along with the magical notes, they will discover the secrets of a 15-year-old girl. We need to decide where to start to unravel this knot and how to return to our previous life. It seems like 15 years ago she was still living in the forest, peacefully dwelling in a forest hut. As usual, Ariel was just sleeping and enjoying a peaceful life. One day the door creaked open and a strange guest stepped across the threshold of the house. Hearing the sound of footsteps, she opens her eyes, trying to recognize someone familiar in him. It feels like a real angel has descended from heaven in the form of this boy. He watches the girl in silence for a while, waiting for her reaction to the intrusion. The child admits that he was terribly interested in looking at the sleeping witch. Cedric just wanted to check if she would wake up when she felt the tip of a knife on her body. Quickly coming to her senses, Ariel realizes that a crazy boy has come to her hut. She reminds that after being stabbed, you can only die, but you definitely won't wake up. Ariel asks to put the dagger aside so that they can calmly talk about everything. This is how the acquaintance with the boy Cedric, who is destined to become the head of the empire, began. Usually the first meeting is much more pleasant, but the boy was never ordinary. At the time, Ariel thought he was a little strange due to the lack of parental attention. He was the first one who dared to come to the Forest of Monsters alone, disturbing the witch's sleep. The Eastern Forest of Monsters is filled not only with thorn thickets, but also with living trees. Inside the forest, time moves much more slowly than outside, as if it had stopped altogether. The borders of this place are impassable, so outsiders cannot get into the forest. The princess and great magician Ariel spent many lonely years in this forest until the day of awakening came. After waking up, it was necessary to check the magic circle located nearby. If the magic seal is broken, monsters from other dimensions will emerge from the portal. The awakening does not last very long. During this time, you should prepare the seal until the next awakening. As expected, she was not destined to peacefully engage in her research into magic today. She decides to simply ignore the noise outside the door, as if she were too engrossed in reading a book. It's hard to ignore something like this, especially if the door is simply smashed to pieces. The boy didn't expect that with a light touch the door would open in such a strange way. He only wanted to knock, waiting for the owner of the hut to open the door herself. Instead, Cedric smashed it to pieces again, although at this rate he would destroy the entire hut. The peaceful life in the forest was shattered when this yellow-haired prince held a knife to Ariel's throat. For a long time, he simply wandered around the house, looking at many interesting things. It's a pity, but the plate slipped out of his hands as soon as the boy managed to take it. Even at that time, Ariel understood that this strange young man would change her whole life for the worse. She wants to know how he managed to enter the Forest of Monsters, the border of which is reliably protected. Only the greatest magician can break the seal. It is beyond the power of a small child. In response, the boy claims that his mother always forbade him from communicating with strangers. Of course, he really did put a knife to Ariel's throat, but the girl managed to open her eyes. Even children know that a princess wakes up only after a kiss from a handsome prince. Instead, when the prince entered the hut, Ariel somehow continued to sleep. A similar plot is often found in fairy tales that my mother once read before bed. Cedric is almost certain that the curse was not lifted only because she is a witch. For such offensive words, the girl immediately sends the impudent boy out of the house. However, he continues to insist that all this time Ariel was so pale, as if she were already dead. The prince stopped only because his mother strictly forbade him to kill people. At first he wanted to wake up the princess with the help of a stone, but his mother also forbade him to rack his brains. So he used a simple dagger, hoping that she would wake up from the prick in her neck. It's as if he doesn't understand that a dagger thrust into the neck kills no worse than a huge stone. As he rushed towards the exit, Ariel decided that her adventures were over. However, judging by his determination, he was preparing to do something more terrible. From the outside, it seems as if the magic of the forest really obeys the will of the little prince. He has a great sense of the power of this terrain and can easily control it like a toy. The strange thing is that the Forest of Monsters is filled with a kind of magic that is beyond the control of ordinary people. It's impossible to imagine how he manages to do the same thing that Ariel trained for so many years. Having stopped the boy, she demands to explain how he knows about the master of the forest. In the world outside, hundreds of years would pass before people would explore this magic. But Cedric acts as if he was given the gift of magic control from birth. Moreover, he was able to determine that the magical aura belonged to Ariel. In response, he begins to tell how he completely accidentally stumbled upon magical artifacts. He saw ancient ruins next to the hut. The power of the mistress of the forest still remained in them. Having said these words, the prince again strives to show something that will make Ariel believe his words. The power stored in these places was too similar to his own magic. That is why he is able to control her so easily, commanding magic to obey. The magic surrounding this child acts as if it is welcoming the most powerful wizard. At this moment, Cedric remembers that he urgently needs to appear at the palace right now. Besides, he has already completed the first part of his plan, which he can continue tomorrow. Before leaving, he promises to bring a lot of toys here, otherwise the forest will be too boring. The magic circle can be used as a portal to quickly travel to the outside world. This is much more convenient, otherwise he would have to get to the edge of the forest. Right before Ariel's eyes, the boy uses teleportation magic without fear of being discovered. And just a second later, in its place there remains only a magic circle and a trace of the movement. If Ariel hadn't seen it with her own eyes, she would never have believed it. Cedric actually used a magic circle, just like the high wizards do. Only the most outstanding wizards are capable of such a spell. Perhaps she saw a real genius for the first time in her life, and it's worth taking a couple of lessons. However, there remains one here who will have to answer a couple of questions. It was this traitor who allowed the boy to get too close to the princess's hut. A living tree must stop intruders and not pretend to be an ordinary tree. The next day, Cedric found himself in the house again, forgetting to knock politely on the door. Ariel wants to understand what kind of magic allows him to break into other people's houses so easily. The boy admits that this time Sebastian also did a favor by tearing the door out by the roots. As expected, instead of blocking the path to the hut, the living tree helped him again. It seems that to do this, all of its branches had to be broken off, otherwise the tree would not have obeyed. In fact, the tree really did try to stop the prince when he was approaching the house. But when Cedric started to fall down, Sebastian caught him with his branch, saving his life. In other words, the forest loves this boy so much that it is ready to sacrifice itself. The Forest of Monsters usually reacts poorly to outsiders, but the prince's case was special. Every plant in this forest feels the strongest magic when he appears on the territory. It felt like he had taken this place for his next playground. He asks the tree to play with him in the vacant lot, calling his wooden friends there. It's strange, but the forest monsters obey the prince from the first word, although he is a stranger. The more Ariel learns about this boy, the better she begins to understand a simple thing. The child simply missed a normal life, since he had been enduring beatings at home for a long time. The abrasion on Cedric's body was not very fresh, meaning the beating had happened a long time ago. Someone beats a child on a regular basis, but the boy prefers to remain silent about it. There is only one person capable of harming a person of such noble origin. It must be someone from the close circle, and most often we are talking about half-brothers. Looking at the cheerful boy, Ariel realizes that she is starting to get entangled in other people's problems. She decides not to create misunderstandings without reason anymore, especially since it is none of her business. One might mistake the prince for an ordinary puppy that accidentally wandered into her yard. From that moment on, the girl decides to simply ignore the fact of the beating, even if new abrasions appear. Yet she continued to look back, unable to accept the cruel treatment. At this moment, the prince states that they simultaneously looked into each other's eyes. After a while, everything should fall into place, and the child will immediately forget about the forest as soon as he grows up. At his age, all children behave the same way, so don't take it too seriously. However, the boy's next visit to the Forest of Monsters turned out to be much stranger. Seeing him on the threshold, Ariel seemed to forget how to speak for a while. Instead of the old abrasion, Cedric's entire body was covered with fresh marks of beating. It's impossible to simply ignore something like that when you see the prince day in and day out. The prince was used to being that child who was ignored even by the servants. The same applies to his mother, who was an outcast in the imperial palace. Noticing the prince in the distance, the maid offers to at least greet Cedric. It is known that he is the son of a maid, although he has a high status. Everyone preferred to pretend not to notice him, even when he passed very close. Almost no one dared to approach the prince, whose existence hung by a thread. Only half-brother Frederick could stop by to say a few nasty words. He suggests that Cedric choose the place on the body where he will strike with his fist. Frederick was born only 5 months earlier, but had a very different status in the palace. It becomes clear that it is the stepbrother who constantly beats this weak boy. Ariel is sure that her brother should be punished by His Majesty because he was the one who started the fight. However, the truth is that Cedric recently killed his favorite horse. The boy admits that at first he wanted to kill Frederick himself, but eventually settled on a horse. He remembers his mother's advice, which forbade killing people without any reason. That's why Cedric decided to slightly injure his half-brother by stretching a rope through the forest thicket. After this incident, they killed the horse themselves only because it had injured Frederick. The prince is sure that if his brother had died instead of the horse, everything would have been much better. It is difficult to accept that due to childish stupidity, they killed the unfortunate animal. Mother taught the prince to be restrained, because irritation often leads to brutal murders. But sometimes his brother irritates the boy so much that he just wants to rip his eyes out of his skull. With each passing day, Ariel realizes that something is clearly wrong with this prince. He talks about murders so easily, as if he sees them with his own eyes every day. The good news is that he continues to obey Ariel, gradually getting used to her. His mother put a lot of effort into raising her son, but one small mistake could ruin everything. Ariel asks to tell what else his mother is interested in besides talking with the boy. Unfortunately, his mother passed away some time ago, leaving Cedric alone. Her last words were a request not to kill people, and the boy intends to fulfill this request. The prince swore not to break his mother's covenant, even if he really wanted to. Perhaps never before in her life had Ariel experienced so many different feelings at once. And yet, that woman really tried to correct his character until the very end. The boy could have become much better if his mother had stayed in this world a little longer. But even this doesn't stop his stepbrother from fighting, in which Cedric deliberately loses. She had already noticed some scars that had appeared on her body more than a month ago. These scars appeared after a famous incident that shook the entire palace. Having burst into his brother's room, Frederick accuses the boy of being the one behind the trap that caused him to break his leg. In response, Cedric advises to break your head when you fall into the next trap. The boy gets hit in the face with a crutch as soon as he manages to utter these words. It all happened so quickly that he didn't have time to step aside in time. Frederick reminds him that he can kill the stupid boy for such a statement. If they had been outside the palace, no one would have saved Cedric from his sad fate. All the maids knew very well Frederick's difficult character and his cruelty to people. However, they can only watch from the sidelines, not daring to interfere in the fight between two young princes. Moreover, many still believe that a degenerate born from a maid was not worthy of pity. He is not needed even by his own father, who has seen the boy only a few times in his life. Frederick warns that their next meeting could very well be his brother's last. He should think carefully about his behavior if he intends to survive. For a while, the prince listens to his half-brother's speech in silence, without saying a word in response. However, the victim never smiles, looking straight into the eyes of the enraged tyrant. Until that moment, Frederick was sure which of the two was the victim. He attacks his brother with fury, wanting to prove his strength and superiority. It is clear that the boy is being bullied only because his mother was of low birth. After her death, Cedric was left completely alone and without the protection of adults. Of course, there are servants in the house, but they rarely pay attention to the unwanted prince. They only provide clothing, food, and some other things for life. After eating all the candy, Cedric asks for another one, if Ariel doesn't mind. As it turned out, the candies in her humble hut were much tastier than the treats in the palace. It's good when there are lots of delicious sweets in the house and there are no restrictions. Now Ariel understands why the child remained in the forest for so long. He comes back every day just to play and escape from the nightmare of his life. Only when he comes to the forest can the boy smile like that, without worrying about anything bad. For a long time, Cedric continues to hang around her, as if he sees Ariel as a close person. He decides to remove the bandage a little earlier, believing that the abrasion is almost invisible. The girl made this healing patch herself, using medicinal plants. It's a little strange that instead of magic, she uses conventional healing methods. For some reason, Cedric is sure that she is a witch and has control over dark magic. If this is not the case, he asks to explain what Ariel is doing alone in the Forest of Monsters. Of course, the question is quite logical, although it comes from a boy a little at the wrong time. If she answers that she is a great sorceress who lived hundreds of years ago, then she will have to explain something else. For example, why is she still alive and hasn't even aged in 1,000 years? Ariel asks to be called by her name, and whether she is a witch or not is up to the prince to decide. She really is a sorceress, but there is no point in stirring up the past before we even have time to get to know each other. In response, he promises not to ask such questions again if the girl does not want to answer. It's good when people understand each other perfectly and agree to make concessions. Ariel allows people to continue coming to her hut, playing with the living trees. All the local monsters are her servants, but the girl will not object to games. From that day on, almost nothing changed, and the boy often appeared in the forest, playing with Sebastian. However, he kept returning with bruises on his face after yet another fight with his brother. She soon decides to study a little medicine and create more effective drugs. Ariel was sure that the child would grow up and eventually completely lose interest in the forest. Alas, she cannot help him avoid new wounds, but she is quite capable of healing them. She wanted to ensure that the boy did not feel pain after the beatings. She felt like she could take care of the prince in any situation, until one day the boy returned to the hut, taking the mistress of the forest by surprise. She immediately notices a bloody knife with fresh blood dripping from the tip. It's hard to understand what happened this time, but it didn't end with a simple fight with his brother. The prince himself was covered in blood and looked as if he had managed to kill someone today. In this form, Cedric really does look like a real maniac with a large bloody dagger. Before entering the house, he must answer what happened to him in the outside world. Instead, the boy asks to give him some food, since he has eaten almost nothing since morning. It's impossible to imagine that anyone would start talking about food at such a moment. Cedric finally admits that his strange appearance is due to his half-brother. In other words, he met Frederick again, but the meeting was a little tougher. Frederick bragged about his new horse for too long, which greatly irritated Cedric. This day would have been quite ordinary if not for one cocky prince. Seeing Cedric, he orders them to stop immediately and take a look at the new acquisition. This racehorse is so expensive that it cost 5 times more to buy one horse. Frederick warns that if his brother decides to kill his new horse, he will go after it. This time, he bought the biggest one just because it was a bit of a thrill. In fact, the boy had already prepared a whip to stage an accident. When Cedric was very close to the horse, he hit the steed with all his might. As expected, the horse rears up, heading towards the boy. In such a situation, there is only one way to avoid death, because this is exactly what Frederick wants. The horse is not guilty of anything. This animal becomes only a tool in the hands of the killer. Sometimes you have to sacrifice someone else's life to save your own. A second later, instead of the boy, the bloody body of a horse falls onto the road. It is not yet clear what happened to her, but Frederick has lost his second horse in a row. Blood poured from the severed artery, splashing everyone nearby. Cedric advises keeping an eye on your pets and not risking their lives for revenge. Otherwise, we will have to cut them all down if we have no other choice. It was perhaps the most terrible thing Frederick had ever seen in his entire life. Wetting his pants, the boy runs into the house, hoping to remain unnoticed by the local maids. And yet Ariel cannot believe that the boy decided to kill an innocent animal. He explains that there was too little time to think, because his life was at stake. After all, he really was still a child and could get very scared. Ariel supports his decision, advising him to attack first when his life is in danger. Next time, it's worth moving a little further away to avoid getting caught in the fountain of flowing blood. But most importantly, Cedric must remember that he is not a criminal and should not get into such situations. It would be better if the boy simply learned to avoid conflicts with his brother. Immediately after this, Ariel decides to do the main thing: thoroughly wash the prince's blood away. It took a lot of time and effort before the dried horse blood was washed off the body. It's a good thing she still had Daniel's clothes, otherwise the boy would have been walking around in just a towel. Surprisingly, none of the servants thought to wash the prince's bloody body. Cedric explains that usually all the servants are busy, so no one came to help with this. For a long time, Ariel did not stop frowning, although he assured her that everything was perfectly fine. At this point, Sebastian decides to cheer his friend up a little by knocking on the window. He was no less worried than Ariel and was glad that everything was fine with the little prince. His mother once warned him that after her death, people who became close to him would have ulterior motives. She said that no one would help for no reason and that one should always be on guard. In fact, this is indeed true, although with such words the prince is clearly hinting at something. Cedric's mother was very worried about the time when she would have to leave her son completely alone. The child was destined to be left without the help of his mother and to cope with the reality of life on his own. However, no one can even imagine the loneliness he feels while growing up. When my mother bequeathed to me to be careful, she knew very well what this would lead to. By leaving her child, she seemed to be leaving a piece of her soul in him. She probably could not rest in peace, worrying about her beloved son. Cedric was born a man who could raise doubts even in the souls of indifferent people. It would be easier if his personality was simple and straightforward, but that is not the case at all. Suddenly, the boy declares that before he was always called ugly because of his stupid appearance. Ariel learns for the first time that someone seriously considers such a beautiful child ugly. However, a child with a bloody knife in his hand can really cause fear in those around him. Meanwhile, he is sure that Ariel is one of the most beautiful girls he has ever met. It wasn't about her face at all if she was thinking about simple external beauty. The prince explains that the girl is surrounded by a colorful aura that looks very beautiful. Only Ariel has such special colors, they swirl and shine brighter than the sun. It becomes clear that Cedric is able to see the manifestation of aura, as if he had already reached the highest level. Magical eyes are a great sign of a great wizard. To check something, she asks to immediately follow her. It won't take much time. She suggests combining the colors to form the magic circle he saw in the forest. All you have to do is bring the little red dot together with the green one and add a drop of magic. It is enough to connect several dots in front of your eyes, and the magic circle will build itself. The main idea is that a great magician does not need to study theory and follow a difficult path. After a few seconds, the first magic circle created by Cedric appears in the air. It is very different from anything Ariel has seen before, because the energy of the circle is truly powerful. Suffice it to say that such energy could destroy an entire village. After another moment, the magic circle turns into a fiery protective barrier. By connecting just 2 dots, he manages to construct a mid-level magic circle. The trouble is that such power cannot be controlled without a lot of experience. If the fire is not stopped, the boy risks burning his tree friend. Ariel advises using water magic, following the instructions in the book. Creating another circle, he quickly turns it into a powerful jet of water. Following this, Cedric directs water into the revived tree before it burns to the ground. Luckily, it worked, although Ariel had to take a cold shower too. Surprisingly, the boy only repeated what was drawn in the book, and the circle appeared on its own. He is surely a true genius, born once in a century. Fate gave the girl a real gift, bringing her together with such a valuable ally. Once in the past, she dreamed of raising her own child with a huge talent in magic. Perhaps that is why she made a choice she shouldn't have made. It will take a long time to correct his character, although that is not important now. The bright side of her soul is ready to accept the boy as a student, making him a great wizard. However, the dark side has always cared nothing about character because it only cares about strength. It may take at least 15 years to complete the training, but there is still something that worries me. They say people with black hair are never grateful, but Cedric has blonde hair. In other words, having taught him the basics of magic, he will one day reciprocate with the same kindness. With its help, you can do much more than continuing on your way alone. Finally, Ariel decides to suggest something that she will later blame herself for a long time. She agrees to become his mentor if the boy is interested in studying magic. Soon he will be able to become strong enough to defeat his half-brother. Her dark side is delighted with this idea because it will allow her to throw a grand party. Strangely enough, the prince does not agree immediately, trying to weigh all the pros and cons. However, if Ariel insists on training, he is ready to take this adventure. By the next lesson, the girl promises to bring an advanced book for the most powerful magicians. To do this, you need to go down to the basement, finding it among a pile of unnecessary junk. There is no doubt that this girl has an excellent understanding of the basics of magic and will be able to share her knowledge. Finding herself in the basement, Ariel spends some time trying to remember where she put the main book. It's foolish to waste time on boring literature when you have such talent among your students. She intends to begin using those secret techniques available only to the most experienced magicians. Of course, Cedric is still a newbie when it comes to magic, but with his gift, he will quickly master the basics. After leafing through several pages, the boy admits that this is the first time he has encountered such writing. It's strange because usually young gentlemen are taught literacy and some sciences from an early age. The prince actually did have a tutor once, but when his mother died, he stopped coming. The teacher did not have time to give the boy even the basic knowledge to read simple letters. Depriving a child of education is the perfect way to turn him into a helpless puppy. They don't train him so that he can never escape even as an adult. At this point, Ariel decides to ruin this plan herself by interfering with the members of the imperial family. The fire in her blazing heart is enough to soon make the prince smarter than any of them. The girl promises to look for basic books that will make it easier to learn letters. It's a little strange that instead of teaching modern letters, Ariel wants to teach an ancient language. As usual, there were quite a lot of books in the basement, but you had to choose only the right ones among them. We are talking about basic books, because without understanding the basics, he will not be able to advance further. Suddenly, a curious thing that had been lost catches your eye. Children find it difficult to learn from boring books, so another approach should be taken. Ariel is confident that a picture book will teach Cedric basic knowledge much faster. It was not for nothing that she spent many years collecting a magical laboratory, creating her own library. A second later, she hears the voice of the little prince who has changed a little. The boy wants to know who that Mr. Daniel is, whose clothes he wore. If he lives in the hut too, Cedric should have seen him. In response, Ariel asks not to ask about this man, who has been living in another place for a long time. Now his home is in heaven, because after death all good people go to heaven. Hearing this, the boy apologizes for his intrusiveness. He doesn't want to upset the teacher. Meanwhile, the prince is surprised by such a number of books dedicated to the basics of magic. Once they've sorted out the base, Ariel promises to give him the most interesting specimens. There is sure to be something very rare here that you won't be able to find in the outside world. For the most basic knowledge, a children's book with ordinary fairy tales is quite suitable. Using these letters, the boy will master ancient writing so that he can then study independently. From this moment on, a long journey of learning begins, which is quite interesting to watch. The boy acts as if he always dreamed of becoming the forest witch's apprentice. He learned most of the letters in the first week of school, so Ariel suggests starting with the most important thing. The basics took a long time, but he already knows how to create magic circles. However, Ariel believes that it is impossible to gain deep knowledge if you do not pay attention to the basics. There is a huge difference between mindlessly creating circles and being able to control them. He shouldn't repeat over and over again about his talent in magic if the prince wants to learn. 10 minutes later, he was ready to head back, not wanting to linger. Suddenly, Ariel decides to stop him, asking him to take something very valuable with him. This book contains simple magic circles, and it will be great if he studies them on his own. In other words, she is ready to give the boy one of the best books in her library. Surely he will have a lot of free time for additional study in the palace. In fact, never in his life had Cedric received such a valuable gift. Incredibly, the real magic book is given to the boy in honor of his excellent results. With this approach to study, he will quickly reach a high level, becoming a master of magic. By evening, the prince begins to understand how to properly increase the power of the fire barrier. However, here are collected ancient symbols that were used in the kingdom of Arendal. He was never able to sense Ariel's magical power, even though she possessed deep knowledge. If you think about it, this girl slept for many years in the middle of a forest filled with magic. She coexists peacefully with monsters, understanding the ancient scriptures perfectly. More than ever before, the prince becomes curious about who his teacher really is. The more he learns about Ariel, the more curious he becomes about magic. It feels like sometimes solving her mystery is much more interesting than learning the subject. The door to the room opens almost silently, as if someone wants to remain unnoticed. Entering inside, the young man notices the book, guessing its origin. This should be reported to the emperor. It seems the prince has acquired a personal tutor. The next morning, Cedric opens his eyes a little earlier than usual. Although he was sleeping quite soundly, he was too eager to continue reading the book. Yesterday, he even forgot to put it away on the shelf, leaving it right on the bed next to him. Turning around, he suddenly realizes that the book has disappeared, although it was definitely lying somewhere here. There is only one servant responsible for this room, who has probably put the book in a safe place. It's a shame that this man was only following Frederick's orders by giving him the find. It was worth understanding long ago that it was not by chance that he entered the prince's room under the guise of an assistant. Having handed over the book, he explains that he accidentally found it on the young master's bed. There is no doubt that the boy simply stole it from the Imperial Library. Now they will not only see ancient writings, but will also consider Cedric a petty thief. The main thing is that this book is Ariel's first gift, which is more valuable than any money. A few minutes later, the servant notices a small silhouette at the end of the palace corridor. It seems that Cedric somehow managed to recognize their plan and came here for the book. He looks like he's about to kill his half-brother and his trusty guard dog. These two tried to deprive him of the last thing they had the strength for after the death of their mother. Once upon a time, his mother forbade her son to kill people, but today he suddenly wanted to break the rule. After killing the horse, Frederick no longer understands what else his brother is capable of. Without waiting, he immediately rushes off, forgetting to return the book to its rightful owner. Cedric will deal with this fat guy a little later, but there is still one more culprit left here. It is much easier to deal with a servant than with his little master, especially since he is caught red-handed. For this purpose, Alfred is ready to carry out any order if the prince decides to punish the guy. First, he asks to tell what happened in this place while he was away. Cedric insists that the scoundrel sneaked into his chambers and stole an expensive book. Alfred proposes to deprive him of his salary and assign him the most difficult work. However, if we follow the laws of the Imperial Palace, the punishment should be harsher. Usually the thief's hands are simply cut off, since he stole something from a member of the imperial family. In response, Alfred reminds us that this old law has long been out of use in the modern world. In this case, the boy is quite capable of doing everything without anyone else's help. The boy reports that Frederick himself gave this order and that he cannot be disobeyed. Realizing who exactly gave the order, Alfred quickly changes his mind. If the first prince wishes to cut off the thief's hands, that is a perfectly fair decision. The servant still tried to stop the madness, but the punishment was carried out on the spot. Alfred apologizes for the blood getting on the young master's clean clothes. There's no need to worry. The boy has long since gotten used to the sight of fresh blood. He didn't even blink an eye as the sword came down on the servant to carry out the punishment. The maids had noticed before that this young man was completely different from other people. However, this should be said more quietly. Cedric had no problems with hearing. The main problem is that the stolen book is still in the hands of the half-brother. Of course, this is not the first time Cedric has heard such talk about himself from the servants. He was so used to gossip that he no longer felt any emotions. One could say that the boy could no longer distinguish between good and bad, trusting his mother in everything. Cedric simply didn't know that there were any boundaries between good and bad. Mom always worried that because of his differences, her son would always be separated from the rest. However, animals always behaved as they only behave in the presence of good people. For example, the cat remained calm when the boy was very close. Mom said that people behave completely differently and can snap back even when there is no reason for it. Sometimes they can become real friends for a lonely person. Cats always seemed strange to the boy because of their fur covering their entire bodies. They are quite cute creatures, but there is something special and hidden from the eyes about them. While walking through the garden, Cedric wanted to understand whether it was necessary to pet soft flowers the same way as cats. He didn't understand what the difference was because they were all living beings. For a long time, my mother could not explain how to properly relate to completely different things. It was clear that the boy had a long journey ahead of him, but that day it came to an abrupt end. The cat they accidentally met on their walk was lying right under their feet. She was dead, and it seemed that someone had deliberately taken the life of such a cute animal. Perhaps she was run over by a carriage, and the coachman was simply distracted by the beautiful view of the imperial garden. It's a pity that it happened so awkwardly, and now Cedric won't be able to pet her like he always did. Suddenly, the boy decided to stroke her head because it was still soft. If he understood his mother's words correctly, it makes no difference whether the furry creature is alive or dead. At this point, the woman asks to stop. She meant something completely different. Dead creatures should be buried and mourned, not petted like ordinary cats. She suggests doing with the cat the same way as is usually done with dead people. In the end, this creature spent a lot of time with them, delighting them during walks. After digging a small grave and placing flowers next to it, the boy sees a real funeral for the first time in his life. Cedric doesn't quite understand what sadness is, but he is quite capable of appreciating the beauty of flowers. So he decides to put beautiful flowers next to the grave, because once the cat was beautiful too. In this way, the mother gradually instilled in the boy the rules that are familiar to people. She believed that over time he would learn to perceive much more human emotions. Cedric was very different from other children, but his mother still tried to teach her son. She ordered him to hide his talents from people until he became an adult. He needs to restrain himself when the desire to kill another person awakens inside him. Before she died, my mother promised that one day they would walk through the heavenly garden again. After this, the woman asks to be left alone, and the boy should go to his chambers. That same evening, my mother closed her eyes forever, full of regret and despair. She knew very well that Cedric would have a hard time surviving in an unfamiliar world. This was her last will, after which the world forever began to seem gray and dull to the prince. He was not interested in anything, and did not even enjoy the sight of beautiful flowers. After his mother's death, this world became even darker than it had been all the years of his life. With these thoughts, the prince wandered through the palace garden, not paying attention to the servants, until one day he notices a strange circle hidden deep in the trees. The old magic circle on the edge of the imperial palace seemed to call him to itself. Entering the center of the circle, Cedric tries to figure out who left the drawing in this place. Artists usually do not paint in the abandoned part of the garden, where even courtiers do not go. Beautiful points of light shimmering in the air clearly indicate the presence of magic. After a few seconds, his magic is gradually drawn into the circle, as if transported to another space. A moment later, the prince dissolves into thin air under the influence of movement magic. It was the first day that Cedric learned about teleportation through his own experience. He is thrown into the middle of the monster forest, which is impossible to reach by normal means. It seemed like the circle was activated by his magical energy, with mana becoming a kind of key. The only question is why his energy is ideal for activating movement. Be that as it may, the boy finds himself for the first time in the place where he soon meets his mentor. He doesn't yet know that the owner of this place is that very magic teacher. After walking a few steps, he notices something very strange, something that only appears in fairy tales. If this is the sleeping princess, then she should be awakened with one kiss. But most importantly, Cedric sees the unusual colors that make up this princess's aura. They are so pure and beautiful, as if she is not an ordinary person at all. The world was always gray in his eyes, and only magical points could make a difference. The girl's surrounding energy was shining too brightly, which immediately attracted the prince's attention. For a while, Cedric watches the sleeping princess in silence, not knowing what to do. I just want to see how she moves, if the girl is alive at all. In fact, the prince really wants to see her eyes, because they must be just as beautiful. Finally, he decides to just wait in the room until she wakes up. When she wakes up, Cedric will apologize to the girl, telling the story of the magic circle. However, after a few hours she was still sleeping, as if she was extremely tired. A person has to work really hard to sleep so soundly. After waiting a couple more minutes, he decides to use the stone to help her wake up faster. Mom talked about not hitting people over the head, but that's exactly what he was about to do. Dismissing the idea, Cedric decides to return to the cabin the next day. Just like last time, the magic circle worked perfectly, transporting the prince to the forest. It would be interesting to know if the girl is awake or still lying in her bed. However, there are many more strange things in the forest besides the princess who sleeps around the clock. Finding himself near the hut, the boy suddenly realizes that there is someone else nearby. The living tree wanted to say something, but at the last moment decided to pretend to be ordinary. Cedric asks not to pretend to be a tree if it is actually a monster. He certainly doesn't look like a local lumberjack who just happened to wander into the middle of nowhere. Looking around, the prince begins to understand that the rumors about this place were true. Besides, the forest of monsters often appeared in children's fairy tales that my mother read before bed. It turns out that right now he is surrounded by thorny vines and monsters that look like simple trees. It's unlikely that Mom would have approved of the location of the walk if she had learned that her son had wandered into the eastern forest. Perhaps time in this place stopped because of the magic of that princess sleeping in the hut. Cedric decides to shake the tree a little, if it really is alive. He wants to know the truth. Who is the owner of the tree and the entire monster forest? The creature simply must know the woman who sleeps in her hut day and night. Cedric's eyes can detect magic in other wizards, but it seems like there is none in Ariel's body. For some time he tries to remember everything he encountered on the way to the hut. A second later, the prince declares that he has already encountered something similar in a children's fairy tale. The Forest of Monsters, where time does not exist, was described in detail in an old story. There was a prince who had to kill all the monsters and then wake up the princess. At the end of the fairy tale, the handsome prince woke her up with a kiss. This is exactly what you should try. Without wasting any time, the boy heads to the hut, hoping that everything will work out for him. It is unlikely that a tree can explain to a person that he is slightly mistaken. Once in the house, Cedric still hopes for a while to avoid the well-known ending. However, it becomes clear that he will still have to kiss the princess, at least on the forehead. According to the plot, immediately after the handsome prince kisses the girl, she must open her eyes. That's right, because he is a prince, which means Ariel should wake up right now. It's a shame that you have to wait so long for a normal awakening. Nothing changed on her face, as if the girl had not felt the prince's kiss at all. If this continues, the boy will have to wait forever to wake up. He understands that any princess would have opened her eyes long ago, so it turns out that this woman is an imposter. It's too difficult to get a person to open their eyes without hitting them on the head. A little pain won't kill, even if he presses lightly on the neck with the tip of the knife. Cedric is unsure whether to stab Ariel or just cut her skin. After all, if you don't calculate the force of the blow, a stab to the neck can end very tragically. At this moment, the owner of the hut opens her eyes for the first time in a long time. Waking up after a long sleep is always hard, especially if someone is trying to kill you. Coming to her senses, she suddenly realizes that this crazy child looks very much like Prince Cedric. She warns that a person will never be able to wake up after being stabbed in the neck. It's strange that while raising her son, his mother forgot to tell him this simple truth. That day, for the first time in his life, the boy desired something, but he was afraid to admit it even to himself. Mom was right when she said that one day, a person dear to one's heart will make one greedy. Thus, Ariel gradually taught him the basics of magic, turning his talent into real experience. Returning after the incident with the stolen book, the boy tells his mentor everything. The news enrages Ariel because the brat is bothering Prince Cedric again. He doesn't attack personally, using cheap tricks and attacking with blows to the back. The problem is that the book was Ariel's first and only gift to him in honor of his excellent academic performance. Cedric had almost nothing in this life, and the book was much more valuable than simple things. The boy confesses that he ordered both of the servants' hands to be cut off as punishment for stealing a book. He didn't want to do it, but at that moment anger completely took over his mind. Unexpectedly, Ariel supports the student, advising him not to think about it too much. The others would be afraid of the prince after hearing the story about the severed hands, but she decides to support him. Ariel is confident that it is better to do just that than to endure bullying. If he repaid them in the same coin, it turns out that he acted quite fairly. Besides, she was never afraid of Cedric and was only wary of the boy. The smell of blood can be removed with one proven remedy, you just need to find it among the others. Just recently, she created a potion from rare herbs that perfectly kills odors. After a few minutes of searching, Ariel begins to realize that the remedy has disappeared somewhere. However, luck soon smiles upon him, and Cedric must immediately run to the bathroom. Over time, he begins to like the forest more and more because there is no one here except Ariel. The product turned out to be quite simple and was almost no different from ordinary soap. Meanwhile, talk about the found book does not stop, and the entire magic tower learns about what happened. Who would have thought that such a simple magic circle with impeccable properties exists? They say that the book once belonged to Prince Cedric, after which it ended up with his brother. The prince often disappears somewhere, as if he had discovered unknown ruins in the forest. Having accidentally overheard the magician's conversation, the informant decides to tell the head about it. This doesn't seem like a normal situation because Cedric is indeed acting strange. Thinking about this, Ansel hurries to notify the member of the imperial family as soon as possible. He understands perfectly well that soon the news about the found book may reach the wrong ears. To prevent this from happening, you should take care of everything in advance. Once in the office, Ansel apologizes for the disturbance and the unscheduled visit. But right now the report is not so important, because he personally checked the information about the magic book. According to his information, it belongs to a kingdom that disappeared from the map 1,000 years ago. However, there are rumors that time stops in the kingdom and it still exists. After listening to the report, the lady orders that the boy be followed and reported to her personally. It is necessary to act according to the circumstances without arousing the suspicions of the young master. As expected, Ansel assigns Cedric to be followed during his daytime walks. He decides to send his best spies, hoping that the guys will do their job. However, it is foolish to think that the greatest wizard of our time will not notice a tail behind him. The boys are still confident that they have hidden well and will remain unnoticed. Looking outside, the spy tries to figure out where the young gentleman has gone. To his surprise, the boy is right in front of those who were supposed to track the way into the forest. Someday these two will learn to do their job, but today, their mission failed. It's a little annoying that Cedric is only now being noticed. Previously, no one cared about the boy's life until he discovered a portal to the Forest of Monsters. It turns out that the very book given to Ariel was of particular value to the magicians. From this day on, I'll have to be much more careful so they don't discover the seal. It would be stupid to get caught out of the blue, knowing the incompetence of local spies and imperial magicians. At that moment, he again hears some sound, as if other servants were following him. Turning around sharply, Cedric demands to see the one who is shamefully hiding in the bushes. However, the sounds immediately fade away, although the prince continues to track the spy. He thought he heard someone in the thicket, but perhaps he just heard the sound of the wind. If Cedric had gone a little deeper into the forest, he would have easily noticed another guest. However, there was little time left. We needed to return to the forest as soon as possible. Luck smiled on Ansel. The prince almost spotted him behind the nearest tree. At the last moment, he managed to notice a magic circle, with the help of which the prince moved to the middle of the forest. The teleportation circle can be reused if the correct spell is chosen. It would be very interesting to find out what secrets are hidden on the other side of such an unusual portal. By that time, His Highness Cedric had already moved to the hut, loudly calling for the mentor. He apologizes for his long absence, but lately strange people have started to surround him. He recently promised that he wouldn't be able to come for a few days, but it all dragged on for weeks. The prince himself is disgusted by the thought that he is being watched by bloodhounds every minute. It seems the magicians still lack dexterity, since the boy was able to notice them. Seriously, the news is pretty bad, considering what they found out about the forest. If they can find a way through the investigation, Ariel will be in serious trouble. She decides to tell about one magic trick that will help cover your tracks. Having mastered the techniques, the student will be able to easily shed the tail if he notices that he is being followed. Previously, Cedric had no idea that such spells even existed in the world of magic. To activate the spell, you will need to create a special circle that will make the boy invisible. Just as the wind erases sounds and the earth hides traces, the air will hide it from prying eyes. After a moment, Cedric realizes that the air around him really does look different. It is still transparent, but the magical seal seems to have enveloped it with its protection. Just a second ago, Ariel saw him in front of her, but then he seemed to disappear. In this form, even a monster wouldn't detect him, let alone an ordinary spy. This is a great addition to his skills, as he will now be able to sneak out of the house without being noticed. Just in case, Ariel promises to give you another book from which you can learn some spells. Today's lesson started off pretty well, and the new skill came in very handy. The time spent in the Forest of Monsters became the shared secret that united the two wizards. Ariel is becoming increasingly interested in teaching her young student, sharing valuable advice. In autumn, they played music with the help of special magic and danced as if at a real ball. In winter, Ariel filled the entire room with fresh tangerines and treated the little guest. During the time spent in the forest in complete solitude, she also missed the usual fun. In the spring, she used magic to create the fruits and berries she collected in the forest. In the summer, the boy asked to use rain magic when it was too hot outside. True, instead of a little rain, Cedric often created a real waterfall. Thus they went through different seasons together, putting into practice the knowledge they had acquired. When the boy was gone for too long, the revived tree itself returned to the magical seal. Sebastian got so used to his new friend that he was ready to wait for him until late at night. This time, Ariel also came here, wanting to warn the tree about something important. She advises not to get attached to a stranger, even if he seems like an ordinary child. Cedric is a human from the outside world and can disappear at any time he wants. Over hundreds or thousands of years of their life, the prince's short life will pass unnoticed. It will remain just a fleeting memory, which is better to get rid of. However, the boy appeared again near the hut when Ariel was alone for a long time. Her little student was eager to show off his new skills, learned at home. It is difficult to understand how to treat a person who will soon end his life. Compared to Ariel's life, his life is just a grain of sand on a vast shore. Sometimes time flies so quickly that you don't have time to notice your children growing up. In the case of the prince, things are even more complicated because time hardly passes in the forest of monsters. Meanwhile, returning back from the outside world, his appearance changed every day. Ariel seemed to have forgotten that he wouldn't always remain a little blonde boy. Cedric's voice was still as friendly, but his tone had become a little rougher. The young man asks to borrow some larger clothes that he was able to find on the second floor. If Ariel didn't mind, he would take it for a while until the tailor made a new one. Before the girl could blink, he had already turned into a grown-up young man. It must be said that growing up made his appearance even more beautiful than before. Cedric found these clothes in a room that had not been used for many years. Now he can put it on without any problems, and the suit fits the prince perfectly. Only now does Ariel learn that the young man turned 15 years old a month ago. He is almost caught up with her in height and could soon become a whole head taller. The prince asks not to worry about this because usually men are taller than women. The tailor may have to sew a second set of clothes in a few months. However, even with this growth rate, he wanted to grow even faster. Ariel asks him to stop standing on his tiptoes when he measures his height. And yet, very soon he won't have to do this, so he won't even need this advice. After spending so much time in the forest of monsters, the prince must be a couple of years behind his peers. Instead, it continues to develop even faster than those who do not leave the outside world. Most likely, magic somehow regulates its development so that it occurs in normal time. At 15 years old, he is fully in keeping with his age and even slightly ahead of it. It feels like Cedric isn't affected by time-stopping magic like everyone else. The girl intends to find an explanation for this fact, since this is the first time something like this has happened. Time must flow slowly for all creatures in the forest, otherwise other magic will stop working. Perhaps with the appearance of the great magician, the forest somehow changed the influence of magic. She asks that you report anything you notice during Cedric's stay in the forest of monsters. In the end, even the magic of a great wizard cannot change the magic of an entire forest. There is only one explanation why time dilation does not work on this person. His magical power must be greater than the one Ariel used to seal the forest. When the young man grows up and learns to use his full potential, he will become even more powerful. Eventually, his power will simply break the forest's seal, causing utter chaos. The dimensional gates will open, leading to a war between the two worlds. The world will have to be destroyed again, and Ariel will experience a bitter loss for the second time. She begins to understand that harmless magical practices lead to inevitable tragedy. Everything must be done to prevent such an ending to history. Only in her hands is the key to the door that locks the monster forest from the outside world. Even if Cedric was able to break the seal, she was quite capable of casting a more powerful spell. The next day, when the prince was ready to move, something went wrong. The magic circle stopped working, even though it uses the same magic. After an unsuccessful attempt, the young man decides to use another form of movement magic. However, this time too, the circle leaves him in place, preventing him from entering the portal between the worlds. As before, magical power is freely transmitted into the circle, but for some reason it does not activate movement. It feels like the energy flow is blocked somewhere at the other end of the portal. Considering that everything is in perfect order with the circle, there is only one assumption left. The prince understands that something strange has happened on the other side of the magic circle, but it is impossible to verify. As long as he remains in the outside world, we can only speculate. It is impossible to imagine a more terrible situation than what is happening in the prince's life. All his dreams were directed to a place that was now forever closed to him. The forest's magic is to blame for everything, and besides, something bad could have happened to Ariel. Meanwhile, Ariel continues to seal the portal from invasion from the outside world. The problem is that she doesn't have enough strength to completely close off access to the monster forest. She can only interfere with the flow by blocking movement, but she can't do this indefinitely. The prince's voice seeps through even the blocked portal, begging the girl to answer. She asks Sebastian not to worry. They knew perfectly well that this day was coming soon. The prince would have to leave the forest someday anyway, and it would be better if it happened sooner. After entering the house, Ariel is unable to understand for some time what has changed in her hut. It feels strangely empty because Cedric will never show up here again. Now you just need to collect your thoughts and survive this deviation from your normal life. Ariel convinces herself that everything will be fine and that she will soon forget about her student. First of all, the girl intends to get rid of the books that remind her of him. Many items will have to be thrown away, and they are unlikely to be of any use to her in everyday life. The dishes should also be taken out, as well as some other things left here by Cedric. Only now does she suddenly realize that all this time the house was in terrible disarray. He casually took off his clothes and threw them all over the floor, without bothering to hang them in the closet. It's a little strange that the prince decided to leave behind even those things he loved most. At that moment, Ariel notices something that she will never forget for the rest of her days. His golden hair looks beautiful even in this form. Surprisingly, there was so much hair, as if the prince had learned to cut it himself. Even a dog doesn't leave behind as much hair as Cedric's visit did. Ariel had never heard of young men shedding their fur after a sudden increase in height. He seemed to have marked the entire house with his hair, making the hut his own. It's time for a general cleaning and taking out all the rubbish left behind by the young prince. This will make it much easier to forget about him, throwing away the memories of the past along with the trash. She continues to convince herself that everything will get back to normal with time. She just needs to be patient. After a while, there will be nothing left here that will make you regret the decision you made. This is usually what happens, because we only remember the good things and forget about the bad moments. At this moment, your head begins to spin. This is a sign of approaching deep sleep. General cleaning will have to be postponed if Ariel doesn't want to fall asleep right on the hard floor. Over time, the prince's traces will disappear on their own, and the cleansing spell will do its job. Awakening will come only after several years, during which time the memories will be gone forever. When she wakes up, she will no longer hear his voice calling from the other side of the portal. Ariel doesn't even realize that the young man stayed near the seal until late at night. He activated the movement magic hundreds of times, but was unable to overcome the blockage. The stream kept returning to the outside world, leaving Cedric in the pouring rain. Soon rumors began to spread throughout the palace that the young master had completely gone mad. They said that he never left the garden at the edge of the palace grounds, having built a small dwelling there. This is the very place where magicians recently discovered a strange magic circle. Prince Cedric spends days near the circle and desperately calls out the name of some girl. No one had heard of the mysterious person who had broken the young master's heart. Every time they bumped into the prince in the garden, the maids were a little wary of his unhealthy behavior. Trying not to be seen, they quickly left the place in case he had really gone crazy. Cedric's gaze became even more empty and gloomy than in the morning days after his mother's death. As he wanders through the garden, he continues to think about what needs to be done to return to the forest. Not noticing the passers-by, the young man accidentally bumps into His Majesty's informant, who was also walking in the garden. It's quite a strange coincidence, since it's rare to meet anyone other than a prince in this place. Ansel apologizes to the young master, hoping he didn't offend him too much. In response, the young man demands that he be released immediately, and that he be careful in the future. Cedric is in no mood to accept an apology from his father's watchdog. It seems that the first attempt to get along with the young man was a failure, but some things become clear. Every day the prince gets worse, and visits to the garden turn into paranoia. In this case, you should use a different approach to get closer to the prince. Meanwhile, Cedric is diligently studying the magic book that Ariel once gave him. It's a shame, but other than a bunch of unnecessary spells, it doesn't contain anything useful. Now the Forest of Monsters is permanently closed, and there is no clue that can break into the portal. The outside world has almost no information about this place, and the answer is known only to one person. The problem is that the connection with this person is broken, and perhaps Ariel herself needs help. One thing is clear, it is impossible to get there without the magic circle, which for some reason stopped working. At this moment, his gaze falls on other books that he had completely forgotten about. Having handed them to Cedric, the teacher told him to take care of them, since each book was valuable. These are very expensive editions containing a large number of the most powerful magic circles. According to her plan, the young man was supposed to study them on his own as homework. Ariel warned that learning the most difficult things requires patience. Remembering this, Cedric begins to guess why she insisted on studying on his own. It was obvious that the mentor had decided to abandon him in advance, giving him magic books as a parting gift. She deliberately blocked the circle so that one day he would not be able to return to the forest. The girl did not take into account that it was in these books that information about all the methods of transportation was contained. In other words, you need to direct all your efforts towards comprehending new magic, ultimately discovering a new method. It's as if a new dream is being born in his heart. He wants to return to the forest of monsters and ask a few questions. It is painful to come to terms with the betrayal of a loved one, but it is even more painful to feel powerless. First of all, the prince decides to get to the forest and only then fulfill another dream. As the mentor said, the boy was gifted with a huge talent in magic from childhood. But without special skills, it is impossible to break the block of the most powerful magician. Without power and money, he will not be able to begin the research that will lead to the understanding of magic. To avoid others being a decree, it would be better to get rid of unwanted people. It is at this moment that Ansel appears nearby again, knowing about the intention to go to the forest of monsters. The informant saw the prince leaving the outside world through a portal. Moreover, he knows very well that the magical flow was blocked from the other side. Cedric demands to know directly if he knows a way to return to the forest without the help of a magic circle. It is known that the forest is guarded by monsters, so the prince will need an army in any case. Ansel is confident that the way will open only for the troops, otherwise one should forget about returning. It feels like he's just making fun of the prince who no knight would follow. Suddenly, the informant offers to become emperor himself, then he will not have to wait for the knight's approval. This guy is crazy if he seriously thinks the son of a maid is a worthy contender for the throne. However, only Cedric has control over rare magic, which has not even been studied by modern scientists. The foundation of the empire is science and technology, followed by magical engineering. There are people who have enormous influence but have not yet joined the factions. If he can secure their support, Cedric could very well be a contender for the top spot in the country. In exchange for his help, Ansel asks to be taken with him when the Forest of Monsters becomes accessible to visitors. By allowing him to go with him, the prince will immediately pay for a place on the throne of the empire. The truth they have been searching for hundreds of years is right there, among the impenetrable thickets. Scientists only want to get there and learn the truth about the secrets of a long-vanished ancient world. Listening to the informant, Cedric begins to guess that this gentleman is leading a double life. There is no point in hiding the truth anymore, so he decides to open up to the future emperor. Ansel has been a second-class officer for many years, leading a unit of the Seekers of Truth. He is ready to become the force of His Highness, seizing power with the support of influential gentlemen. All that is required from the prince is his cooperation, and in return he will receive the desired place on the throne. With its help, he will be able to return to the closed place that became the meaning of his whole life. This deal is beneficial to both of them, so Ansel is counting on Cedric's friendship in return. He vows to protect His Highness until the very end, becoming his closest advisor. In the end, the prince will not regret his decision and will be grateful for this gift. With the support of mages and magical engineers, they will be able to do much more. Moreover, the knight's complete loyalty will be ensured by influential faction leaders. All enemies will be defeated, and doubting faction members will side with the winner. Thus, having killed his enemies and subjugated the nobles, nothing could stop the young emperor. After some time, Cedric quickly achieves a place on the throne, having done everything as Ansel advised. He was an excellent leader of palace wars. Every step this man took was quite successful. Thus, the preparations were completed, as the young Emperor Cedric had ordered. Without wasting any time, he orders them to leave while the army's forces are mobilized. They had a journey ahead of them to the Forest of Monsters, where the former mentor still remained. Just now, Ariel woke up from a deep sleep, seeing the room as before. She tries to remember how many years her sleep lasted and what needs to be done first. After leaving the chambers, the girl simply remembers her own home for a while. At first glance, things seem quite familiar and nothing reminds of the prince's presence. Everything was so clean, as if she had just finished a general cleaning. Although Ariel is sure that deep sleep overtook her by chance, forcing her to put off cleaning for several years. However, no traces of his presence were found, which means everything is going according to plan. The seal was also intact, and the magic circle was locked, just like last night. At that moment, she notices an old friend who was acting a little strange. Usually, the revived tree was in a hurry to meet its mistress, but now it was behaving very sullenly. The girl asks not to worry about the prince if Sebastian still regrets the separation. At least after sleep, her emotions disappeared and her heart was at peace forever. On the last night, Cedric continued to call her name loudly, but then his voice broke off. He was always a determined child, but even people like that eventually give up. It's hard to remember how much time has passed since then, but the prince probably even forgot her name. Remembering him, Ariel only mentally wishes Cedric happiness, which this kind young man fully deserves. Everything returns to normal, and she is once again surrounded by a peaceful forest where no human foot has ever set foot. At that moment, a shadow appears overhead, as if the sun was blocked by something huge. Ariel looks up and begins to understand that a happy, peaceful life only exists in children's fairy tales. Instead, from somewhere near the border, the entire forest is attacked by strange, fiery projectiles. It feels like she's witnessing a real meteor storm right now. It is clear that the shells are equipped with the most powerful magic combined with something unknown. Just a couple of minutes later, half of the forest is ablaze, and the other half is about to become the next target. Looking into the distance, the princess notices a dark silhouette approaching her. There is a very powerful magician on that side of the forest who launched a surprise attack. It's incredible that a man with such powerful magic would simply decide to destroy the forest. A second later, a magical projectile appears in his hands, aimed at Ariel. In response, the girl orders the tree vines to block the mage's attack. For the first time in many years, Sebastian begins to take on his true form. The main duty of the revived tree was to protect the forest and its mistress. In this form, the creature no longer resembles an ordinary tree as it did before. Still not understanding the intruder's motives, the girl decides to leave the attack zone as quickly as possible. Noticing the princess running away, the emperor decides to try another method. Using thunder magic, he commands lightning to strike the ground where Ariel is currently located. One blow was enough to knock her off her feet, leaving her unable to escape. In this form, the girl will no longer be able to return to the hut, which is reliably protected by magical barriers. It seems Cedric has made a bit of a mess here, although no one will complain. The mistress of the forest is no longer the mentor capable of punishing the little boy. Coming a little closer, he asks to tell her if the girl needs help. Out of politeness, he won't refuse, since it was Ariel who extended her hand many years ago. However, she just as easily abandoned the student, closing the portal with a simple flow blocker. For a while, the girl tries to come to her senses, but all her thoughts are jumbled together. She sees only the proud and arrogant face of a man who rules over the whole world. It is difficult to understand why he needed to attack a forest that only a few people know about. If a stranger had wanted to take it into his possession, he would hardly have burned the place down. Coming very close, the magician says the words you least expect to hear. He proposes to Ariel, because this is precisely why Cedric caused such a hellish pogrom here. It's incredible, but he actually asks to marry him after everything that happened in the forest. 5 minutes ago, the guy dropped a meteor shower on her head, almost killing her on the spot. And now he smiles sweetly, as if instead of a meteor shower, he showered her with wedding roses. No normal person proposes immediately after a fight when life is hanging by a thread. Moreover, it is unclear how he knows her name, having met Ariel for the first time in his life. The girl tries to remember who this crazy guy with blue eyes could be. Perhaps if that child had grown up a little, he would have looked quite like an invader. Moreover, the stranger also had light hair, the locks of which are impossible to forget. It had been 10 years since they had last seen each other before the portal was blocked. Cedric reminds her that she would have slept much longer if he hadn't come into the forest. In other words, she should thank him for her quick return to life. The former student wanted to see him so much that he smashed the forest into small pieces. Perhaps he really does consider this visit a wonderful wedding present. However, in the fairy tale, the prince appears on a white horse and wakes the princess with a simple kiss. It feels like Cedric doesn't even understand what his proposal means. At this point, he asks to answer honestly whether that magic circle is still there next to the hut. However, first he intends to try to do something that his body has not allowed him to do before. After growing up, he easily lifts the girl, although she was once 2 heads taller. If you remember, he once promised that he would soon become much taller than his mentor. It's funny that instead of studying together, he is now planning a life together. Not every girl will like such experiments, so it's better to leave the games alone. Cedric wants to finish the job by looking at the magic circle with his own eyes. If he really did break down, the guy wouldn't blame Ariel for everything. With each passing minute, she understands better and better the simple truth: Cedric will never be the same again. He had changed so much, it was as if he and that boy had nothing in common. At that time, the boy said he was still just a child and did not pose any danger. But as an adult, he is not one to take no for an answer, quickly heading towards the magic seal. He immediately sees the materials that Ariel used to seal the flow. That is why the circle stopped working, and the unfortunate boy was left alone. He suggests checking whether the seal will work if the artifacts are simply removed. It wasn't by chance that he traveled a long way to get to this place. It is difficult to count how many corpses had to be stepped over on the way to the imperial throne, and all this just to take Ariel with him, showing her the beauty of the outside world. As usual, he forgot to ask her opinion, because she had no intention of leaving her house. In response, the Emperor reminds her that her opinion is of no interest to anyone, since the decision was made long ago. His heart became even colder than before. Now nothing could change Cedric. Smiling with a familiar smile, this man hides a real demon inside. Fortunately, the tree monster's cores were almost undamaged and will come back to life after some time. The books and records that have been accumulated over 1,000 years are in the house, although they will no longer be needed. For the first time since the war, she must leave the forest, finding herself in a completely unfamiliar world. The main thing is that the seal and the other magic circles continue to exist. Ariel can leave this dimension at any time, but there is no particular need for it now. Cedric orders the army to be brought back, promising to be at the palace much earlier. It's stupid to walk through the entire forest when there is a working magic seal nearby. A moment later, Cedric uses transport magic, taking Ariel with him. She will probably be interested to see how the world has changed over the past hundreds of years. However, the changes in the life of the former student are also quite serious, especially his situation. The transition took less than a second, and the view of the forest thicket instantly changed to something else. It's strange that Cedric chose to move to such a strange place, where there are so many extra eyes. However, all these people greeted the guests with honor, as if they were the local hosts. Ansel prepared in advance for His Majesty's return, summoning all the servants for this purpose. He hopes the journey went smoothly and that moving through the portal didn't take too much effort. In response, Cedric asks not to arrange this circus. He does not need any pompous greetings at all. The advisor is quick to remind everyone that everything is in order with the main event. His Majesty can take advantage of this right now, if such is his will. We'll have to believe that the blue-eyed boy became emperor while Ariel was sleeping in the hut. He could not get into the forest through the circle, so he was forced to gather his forces and break through the defense. Previously, she thought that he was a child from a rich family and not a crown prince at all. If even the servants ignored him, Cedric would not have been able to climb to the very top. In response, he asks not to rush things. Too much has happened in recent years. They can discuss this next time the Emperor has free time. Besides, now the bride and groom have a lot of time for discussions and memories. From that day on, the Imperial Palace becomes her home and Ariel can live as she wishes. At this moment, she again reminds him of the proposal to which she did not agree. It seems that such nonsense is still swarming in the head of this simple, sweet girl. Cedric has recently become emperor and has no intention of asking her consent. The invasion of the forest was carried out only to return the girl to the outside world, and now he wants to complete the job by making Ariel his empress. It's a pity that the new empress doesn't even know the name of the country she will rule. Cedric doesn't care about unnecessary details, he just does what he thinks is right. Besides, the Forest of Monsters has already been burned down, and soon Ariel's house will be completely destroyed. In other words, she has nowhere else to go except the Imperial Palace, so she should agree. Cedric decorated the Empress's new room with his own hands, hoping that the girl would like it. Finally, he asks not to worry about anything and just relax after a hard day. She's still trying to say something, although in Cedric's case it's completely useless. A moment later, the girl hears only the click of the lock of her own room. If she's not mistaken, this man simply locked his future wife in a room. He did it so quickly that she didn't even have time to say a word. This room looks more like a trap than an emperor's wedding gift. Plus, it looks pretty weird considering how much red Cedric uses. Everything was red, including the sofa, blankets, pillows, tables, and even the wallpaper in her personal room. The carpet chosen was so red, it looked as if the entire floor was covered in the fresh blood of his defeated enemies. Of course, the huge bed is also done in red, although this choice is quite successful. This room is the perfect place to go crazy as quickly as possible. Surely, in this way, Cedric is simply taking revenge on her for blocking the magical seal. The dress has a cleaning spell cast on it, but even with it, everything is in perfect order. However, it makes no difference whether the dress gets wrinkled or remains just as neat. Ariel tries to understand what is happening and how to behave in her relationship with the young emperor. It is clear that 10 years ago, Cedric simply could not tell the truth about his life in the palace. He was afraid that in this case, the girl would refuse to teach him magic and abandon him, as the others did. As a result, the boy became one of those men who always repay their debts. It is not for nothing that they say that black-haired animals cannot be tamed and made domestic. However, Cedric has blonde hair, which means it's not about the color of this person's hair. Besides, she remembers very well that in Arundel there were a lot of people with black hair. Ariel couldn't even subdue the fair-haired beast and is now reaping the benefits. It's hard to get used to the feeling of becoming a victim of your own stupid mistake. Right now, her mind is too exhausted to process everything that has happened. The girl has been having nightmares for a long time, in which the image of a terrible war appears. For a long time, she has been trying to find at least one survivor from among her loved ones. Even after such a bloody battle, at least one of them had to survive. At this point, someone starts loudly accusing Ariel of being the culprit of the tragedy. The war happened after she made a mistake that took the lives of hundreds of innocent people. Unable to understand where the voice is coming from, Ariel tries to spot a survivor among the corpses. However, instead of a living person, the souls of people who died due to her fault turn to her. Ariel asks not to say such things to her because she did everything to stop the war. Only now does she notice another fallen warrior who has become the greatest loss. Daniel no longer shows any signs of life. His cold body will never become alive. Like all other warriors, he fought against the invaders from the outside world and was one of the first to fall. It seems the souls were right and the girl's actions resulted in irreparable losses. It's too late to use healing magic because wounds can only be healed by living people. In Daniel's case, she can only mourn the loss and blame herself for the terrible mistake. It is difficult to know what to do for a lonely girl who has become alone in this cold world. She had nothing left but memories of happy days long gone by. With these thoughts, the girl suddenly opens her eyes. It seems she was crying in her sleep again. Having come to her senses a little, Ariel tries to calm down because it was just a dream. In such a room, you can't dream anything except terrible nightmares with pictures from the past. Cedric has been there all this time and wants to know who Daniel really is. She used to always dodge the question, but now she's not in a position to lie. It will be better if the Empress becomes obedient and treats the Emperor with respect. If she needs any help, Cedric promises to do everything in his power. Still, he had already asked about this guy, so he should answer the question directly. Ariel asks not to lean so close, otherwise it will be a little dangerous. Trying to push him away, she suddenly realizes that the boy has become incredibly strong. As a result, the girl herself falls to the floor, although she initially tried to push Cedric away. His chest is so strong that his arms feel like they are resting against a solid stone wall. At that moment, a strange atmosphere arises between them, as if obliging them to something forbidden. The boy who was her student in the past had long since ceased to be a little child. He lifts Ariel easily into his arms, as if he were holding a weightless child's toy. Cedric suggests not to push himself so hard, otherwise the nightmares will come more often. It seems she is hiding a lot of things, and this time she will leave the Emperor without an answer again. But the day will come when she will have to tell the truth, and he is quite capable of waiting. Cedric doesn't understand why the girl is so tired that she has nightmares almost every night. However, in this crazy prison, one can dream nothing but nightmares. At some point, she loses her temper, declaring that he had deliberately placed her in this room. It is no coincidence that the entire room is painted red and there is not a single white thing here. For some reason, Cedric is sure that it is the color red that can make a girl happy. After all, she herself said that red is her favorite color. Many years ago, when they were walking in the garden, the prince admired the flowers there. There were many beautiful flowers there, and the teacher seemed to merge with them into one whole. It was at that moment that she admitted that she would not trade the red dress for any other. However, in this they are quite similar, because the Emperor also adores red things. In other words, if she hadn't said those words that day, she wouldn't be suffering now. Ariel asks not to take everything so seriously because girls' tastes are always fickle. After that, she says something else that Ansel would be better off never knowing. For several days, while Cedric was decorating the room, the advisor tried to dissuade him from this idea. In the end, he still did it his way, turning the bride's room into a beautiful oak coffin. And yet he decorated it for Ariel to show the girl that he cared. Perhaps if the emperor had good taste, he could have made something exquisite. Instead, the interior turned out so tasteless that I want to redo absolutely everything. The girl is forced to admit, but Cedric himself could not live here for a single day. She demands that he make himself a normal room if he still hopes to save the relationship. His problem is that, without even knowing the bride's preferences, Cedric decided to do something like this. When someone wants to please someone, they are first interested in their personal opinion. But he remained the same egoist, believing that everyone around him liked his brilliant ideas. Suddenly, the guy interrupts his bride, suggesting that they take a bath and have a good meal. While she was out of the room, he would make changes, since this option was so bad. I must say, he grew so much, it was as if a giant's hand had been on Ariel's head. Having called the maids, the emperor orders them to take the guest to the bathroom. They are obliged to take care of her as if the girl were already a reigning empress. As before, Ariel is fairly easy to distract, although she can be quite rude at times. For some reason, Cedric is sure that after many years she has not changed her old habits at all. However, there really is too much red, so Ansel has some work to do. Meanwhile, while waiting for her mistress, the maid decides to express her opinion directly. Miranda thinks that the woman has no manners, and it is strange that the emperor chose her. In response, Greta asks to watch her language. After all, the future empress is in the bathroom. It is foolish to think that Princess Rosemary or Lady Violet would be worthy rivals. Greta has no idea what her friend is up to, but she definitely won't take part in this adventure. She advises keeping her mouth shut if she plans to work here for at least a couple of years. You need to bring the guest clean clothes, otherwise she will think that no one is looking after her. Meanwhile, Miranda needs to come up with something to do with her gloomy face as soon as possible. By casting such a glance in the direction of the guest, she risks bringing big trouble upon herself. As expected, Ansel added a lot of white to the interior, making the room much brighter. Now it's a normal and quite nice room with a bright red accent. Ariel has already bathed and eaten her fill, although she still feels pretty bad. To return to the forest, you need to find another magic circle if nothing else works. Suddenly she realizes that she won't be able to retire to her room for many years to come. Cedric doesn't stop watching, and even now, after returning from the bathroom, she is not alone. It's unlikely that Ariel will ever get used to this kind of attention. It's too intrusive. In the past, she knew a sweet little boy who was polite. Cedric notices that she immediately abandoned that boy as soon as he grew a little taller. When he almost caught up with her height, the girl cast magic on the seal, blocking the flow. As a result, he remained on the other side of the forest and was forced to live in complete solitude for many years. Cedric probably wouldn't have grown up knowing how Ariel would react to him growing up. At this point, the conversation slowly begins to go in some strange direction. It's important to remember that for a guy, this is just a game, and you shouldn't give in to his whiny stories. He knows that she is weak for his handsome face, covered in crocodile tears. It's impossible to ignore such a handsome man when he cries because he's separated from you. At such moments, you want to console him, make him smile, and look at the world differently. Suddenly, Cedric suggests getting rid of all the little children living in the country. If she doesn't like them that much, he's willing to do it tonight. In the end, having gotten rid of everyone younger than Cedric, the girl will love only him. In any case, she will be interested in him, and that's already pretty good. He wants to see Ariel's gaze only on himself, knowing that there are no competitors left in the country. Ariel demands that this idiotic idea be abandoned. Small children are not to blame for anything. She insists that she has no intention of leaving him and that there is no reason for mass murder. Immediately after this, Cedric decides to leave the room. Today has already been a difficult day. He would like to stay all night, but they can return to this conversation later. Tomorrow they will meet again, and the girl will have to get used to her new home. As usual, Cedric quickly closes the door without giving anyone a chance to say anything. He still hears her asking him to stay, because this is the first time they have started a conversation on the subject. There is no point in convincing a person that you are right when he has finally decided how to act. And yet the young man understands that the guest has long noticed one small detail. A powerful sealing spell was placed on the doors of the room from the very beginning. If it is not enhanced with other magic, she will easily open the door and leave the room. Now, having corrected the seal a little, there is no need to worry about the safety of the captive. At least in the eyes of the palace servants, the girl looks more like a prisoner than an empress. Ariel doesn't have magical powers, but she has enough knowledge and years of experience. We need to hold her as tightly as possible so that she doesn't even think about escaping from the palace. At the same time, the girl understands that Cedric reacts too sharply to any statement. He didn't even bother to explain the reason why he left her locked in the room. In fact, the young man does not intend to make the same mistake as before by missing out on her. Once upon a time, just one mistake cost him too much, separating him from Ariel for 10 years. This time she won't be able to leave his life so easily because she has nowhere else to run. He became emperor only to lock the girl in his luxurious cage. The imperial palace will become a place from which she will not be able to find a way out. And magic, developed almost to its very limit, will help Cedric achieve his goals. Meanwhile, as the mages continue to explore the forest of monsters, they notice something strange. In many years of work, this is the first time they have seen such a strong aura emanating from the seal. The size of the magic circle is truly enormous, as if it was created 1,000 years ago. This is not something that ordinary mages from the Imperial Laboratory can handle. If the seal is accidentally broken, the consequences could cause an unprecedented catastrophe. It is necessary to report the discovery to His Majesty as soon as possible, passing on the coordinates of the seal. That same evening, Ansel reports news he heard from a very reliable source. The discovered seal still bears traces left by the great sorceress Ashildr. The research was interrupted because a mage of the required level could not be found. It looks as if alien monsters could burst out of the seal at any moment. After some time, servants arrived in the room of the future empress. Introducing herself as the head maid, Miranda promises to keep the room clean. If a guest needs anything, she can contact the maids at any time. Afterwards, Ariel is presented with a complete guide for palace guests, complete with colorful illustrations. However, the maid has nothing else to add, since the emperor has forbidden long conversations. Thus, she is left alone again, hoping that this captivity will not last long. It turns out that Ariel is only allowed to visit the places specified in the guide. It feels like the emperor wants to restrict her in everything, including her choice of places to walk. All her movements are under close surveillance, there is no doubt about it. There is one small problem though, as the manual isn't exactly easy to read. For a long time, the girl cannot understand why not a single letter of this text seems familiar. If you look at the book through her eyes, there will be nothing useful on the pages except pictures. If that's true, right now she's seeing a completely new alphabet created by the emperor. While she spent almost all her time in the forest, the world around Ariel continued its usual movement. Civilization changed, and with it, writing changed, as always happens. The book from which Cedric learned magic was written in an ancient language that had been extinct for hundreds of years. Considering that he was a member of the imperial family, the boy had to study writing. But Ariel herself also knew almost nothing of the ancient languages of the times of Arundel. However, in the eyes of modern people, it is Ariel who is an illiterate person. Understanding this, the girl asks the maid to stay until she has time to leave. It's embarrassing to admit that she can't read the manual because she doesn't know the letters. At that moment, she notices something very familiar, as if Cedric had left it there on purpose. He knew perfectly well that Ariel would immediately see the writing as soon as she opened the door to the room. However, Miranda forbids touching the expensive thing if she does not want to anger His Majesty. This artifact is a legacy of the Kingdom of Arundel, which existed 1,000 years ago. They say that the ornate and wise notes were left by the sorceress Ashildr herself. The maid only allows one to examine such a precious relic from afar. If a treasure of this level is damaged, the girl will get into a lot of trouble. It's a good thing she doesn't know who actually left those notes on plain paper. It's even funny that modern people take it for a real relic. Of course, you can't reveal the truth about your origins over a mere trifle. The maid would be surprised to learn that the great sorceress was the one standing opposite her, and the relic was just a collection of random inscriptions made out of boredom. In other words, Miranda is seriously afraid of ruining ordinary scribbles without any meaning. Suddenly, she declares that Ariel is incapable of understanding even the basics of social etiquette, and since she was allowed into the palace, she needed to forget her village manners as quickly as possible. Apparently, this maid is too hostile towards the palace guest. If one maid allows you to raise your voice, then what can you expect from everyone else? In response, she reminds that the head maid is personally responsible for the relic. However, Cedric should have noticed such strange manners when he hired her. Ariel warns that the maids have no right to look down on the palace guests. Miranda sees for the first time the guest's haughty look, which only nobles can have. She feels a lot of tension just because the girl is looking into her eyes. In the end, Ariel gives her final warning if she is so stupid. Realizing that punishment awaits her, the maid begs for forgiveness for her impudent behavior. You need to lower your head much lower when the Empress appears in front of you. Ariel still can't believe that servants are allowed to quarrel with noble guests. If this is how respect for the Emperor is shown, then the conversation with the maid will be short. Miranda promises to improve if the lady gives her just one chance. Ariel begins to guess how all these servants treated Cedric. At that time, he was forgotten even by his own father and constantly suffered humiliation. Having become the ruler of the empire, he certainly does not spare those who did not spare him many years ago. I just want to get angry and take out my anger on this capricious, proud servant. The throne must be held tightly since he was able to acquire such property. It is not at all that the emperor forgives such behavior because of his gentle nature. Oh no. He simply doesn't give a damn about anything that happens in the palace and throughout the empire. Cedric's main concern is Ariel's eternal confinement within the walls of the imperial palace. As he heads to her room, he suddenly notices a girl in her pajamas right in front of the servants. Apparently, she was in a great hurry to run outside since she forgot to put on a dress. Quickly realizing what he needed to do, the young man headed towards his guest. Having covered her body, next time Cedric asks her not to run out into the hallway in just her pajamas. It's good that only the closest subjects and a few women are present here. In response, she begins to assure that the servants of the imperial palace do not meet the standards. They have no respect for the person of the emperor, who has long ceased to care about such things. However, the emperor is obliged to educate his servants so that they do not dare to disgrace the honor of the ruler. Such an attitude cannot be forgiven, even in the imperial palace, even if he doesn't care. He will remember Ariel's advice when most of the servants start to simply ignore orders. The main thing is that during the conversation, the girl accidentally calls Cedric powerless. It is hard to believe that one of the most cruel rulers is considered a powerless emperor. He intends to find out who exactly dared to contradict the young lady while he was not in the room. It seems the head maid is taking on too much and deserves to be punished. In any other case, he would have written out a death sentence without regret. But now Cedric decides to use this situation for his own personal gain. A small misunderstanding will only play into his hands, and he assures that he is truly powerless. He has been humiliated since childhood and now needs constant protection. Never before had the advisors seen the bloodthirsty Emperor Cedric ask for help. Ariel immediately asks to trust her. She will never tolerate these vile humiliations. If necessary, she promises to personally stand up for him and teach the maids proper manners. The words of this unusual guest sound quite convincing, although Ansel understands everything. But the move on the Emperor's part is actually not a bad one, because it will bring him even closer to Ariel. And yet he insistently asks not to take off their outer clothing until they enter the room. The very fact that she doesn't know a single letter of the modern language is not something to be happy about. But Cedric also didn't know the ancient language, having studied magic from Ariel's textbooks. She finally admits that she really doesn't understand a word in this manual. It was a shame she remained silent for so long. She could have simply told the truth at the time of their last meeting. It's a little funny that his former mentor herself forgot how to read texts. I had to endure stupid jokes at my expense, although he understood perfectly well what the problem was. Ariel is fluent in the ancient language of Arundel, and who better than Cedric to know that? In the past, he would have had no trouble teaching her to read and write, but this case was special. Cedric reminds that once a girl simply abandoned him as an unnecessary thing, and now she asks for a favor as if they had only been separated for a few days. That is why it will be better if she does not learn the language and always remains dependent. Otherwise, it will be much easier for the girl to plan some kind of prank. It would be wonderful if she remained in the palace forever, unable to leave its confines. With these words, he leaves her alone again, refusing even the most harmless request. Cedric understands perfectly well that it is much easier to control the illiterate. Moreover, the girl formed the opinion that the Emperor had no real power. Ansel is ready to convince her otherwise, if His Highness so wishes. But instead, it's better to leave things as they are, considering that Ariel is confused. Of course, she has the energy of a person who is able to make servants bow down. Cedric realized from the very beginning that he was dealing with a very unusual person. Perhaps in the distant past, this girl had a much higher status. The more he studied Ariel, the more he understood her true significance in his destiny. However, one matter remained unfinished, because the servants really did get out of hand. The guest said that someone decided to insult the Emperor himself out loud. It is Miranda who is the nasty person who is caught talking dirty. Cedric has no intention of forgiving such behavior, which means the maid must die. Only the death penalty can atone for the grave sin on this girl's soul. In her last moments, Miranda still tries to beg for forgiveness, assuring that this will not happen again. This case is an excellent lesson for those who still doubt the power of the ruler. Besides, the room gets noisy every time Miranda appears nearby. The Emperor doesn't like noise. This is another reason to get rid of an unwanted person. After some time, rumors about His Majesty's new chosen one spread throughout the country. It was said that he brought a girl from the magic circle into the palace without regard for her safety. Besides, she looks too sloppy and doesn't even know social etiquette. There is also other news that the future Empress still cannot read or write. At this rate, the empire will simply fall apart due to the ruler's tyranny. Thus, people began to say that the Emperor preferred dirty women. Instead of marrying a girl from a noble family, he chooses a commoner. However, over time, people begin to come to the palace who are ready to correct her image. The owner of a fashionable boutique in the capital suggests starting to take measurements right away. She promises to do her best to create the trendiest dress for Ariel. They decided to do this from the very morning, although such a rush was completely unnecessary. Watching the process, Cedric asks to sew a dress in which she can walk around the palace. Ariel insists that ready-made outfits from her personal wardrobe are quite enough for her. She really does behave rather strangely, refusing new, elegant dresses. Madame Larrière invites you to choose the design you like best. The booklet contains all the latest models that have taken over the world of modern fashion. The assistant suggests using her golden eyes as a guide when choosing a color. At this moment, the Emperor's voice is heard in the hall, declaring that Ariel is approaching red. For some reason, he is sure that red is the color that will best reveal her image. Moreover, the Emperor recommends making it from hydrangea flowers, which will make it even more impressive. Every day he completely takes over her life, not even allowing her to choose a dress. There is no way Ariel would wear the red hydrangea outfit he had planned. Choosing the right dress style should be left to the professionals, because that's what Madame Larrière is for. She advises not to make him repeat it twice unless Cedric wants a scandal. From the outside, their conversation clearly resembles something, although it's embarrassing to admit it. The girl speaks as if she is giving orders or commands to train a dog. But the servants must not consider His Majesty as their mistress's tame dog, even if sometimes it seems like the Emperor really does become a cute little dog. This woman seems to consider him a pet, but the Emperor is madly in love with it. It seems that at this rate she will become its mistress, capturing the Emperor and the entire country. Soon people started talking about the fact that the mad dog had an owner. Rumors about the palace have started to spread for the second time, and Ariel once again makes a serious mistake. By treating him like a child, the girl changes the attitude of those around her. She is already known as an illiterate woman, and now also as Cedric's trainer. The idea of escaping comes into her mind again, but this time it's much more serious. There is simply no other choice if Ariel still wants to preserve the remnants of her honor. But without knowledge of the letters and without money, this idea will remain in the head unless she does something. Pulling herself together, she decides to once again start a conversation about the circle. Ariel wants to check the magic circle he used to teleport. Cedric knows perfectly well that the girl does not have magical powers and will not be able to move. It sounds quite logical, although she is clearly not telling us something more important. However, right now, Cedric wanted to show something, so an inspection of the circle was not difficult to arrange. At this moment, she sees for the first time a real miracle that is only possible in modern times. Previously, only the most experienced and talented wizard could create something like this. But now the Imperial Palace, where they were a second ago, is turning into a monster forest. Moreover, her old friends are also here, although Sebastian did not expect their return so soon. This living tree immediately recognizes the same boy that the Emperor was many years ago. It seems to be able to see his aura, as Cedric's appearance has undergone many changes. However, not long ago the Emperor also learned quite a lot of new things about the local trees. For example, in a moment of danger, Sebastian assumed his true form to protect the forest. He could destroy the intruder in a matter of moments if things went too far. However, recognizing the familiar aura of the little prince, he suddenly stopped. There was no doubt that the intruder was the same prince who had appeared in the forest 10 years ago. This time, history repeats itself again when Sebastian sees the same man in front of him. Sometimes even trees can burst into tears like real children if emotions run high. Cedric intends to place these trees near the magic circle to serve as guards. Ariel still can't understand what good Sebastian sees in the man who burned down the forest. He recalls that he only dealt one volley blow, but then healed every wound. In other words, no living tree was in danger because they were his friends. This man, like no one else, is able to distinguish friends from traitors. Soon they reach a magic circle directly connected to the forest. It was located south of Arendal, and you can roughly understand where they are at. Yet it is difficult to understand why the circle suddenly appeared on the grounds of the Imperial Palace. Magic circles always have fixed coordinates and cannot be moved. It turned out that several generations ago the Emperor decided to build a palace right next to the circle. In other words, the circle remained in place, and the site for the construction of the palace was chosen specifically. Cedric was the first to accidentally wander into the place where the circle was hidden in the thick of the forest. That's how they met Ariel, which means it can be considered a will of fate. She must believe in fate, otherwise she wouldn't be able to believe in the existence of magic. Of course, time passes completely differently in the forest, and in the outside world 1,000 years have already passed. Despite this, the circle is perfectly preserved and even exudes a magical aura. Suddenly, the girl remembers that another magician cast preservation magic on the magic circle. A wizard named Akelnar was a powerful archmage who created a special spell. It was a pity that at that moment she didn't ask what formula he used for the preservation magic. There was one important thing Cedric hadn't noticed before when he was much younger. But if you think about it, that forest was filled with strange creatures from the very beginning. A hut that always remains clean and is restored even after destruction. Surely the spell was cast on the house too, since it was able to withstand the meteor attack. Moreover, Ariel also did not age a single year, no matter how much time passed. She hadn't changed since their first meeting, as if time had stood still for this witch. Unlike her, Cedric has become much older and has changed a lot in appearance. This means that the rumors about the magic of the sorceress Ashildr are true time stops in the forest. Ariel, although she currently does not possess magical powers, still has a good understanding of the basics of magic. So there were times when Cedric suspected that she was that very witch. From that moment on, he searched for various materials and found information about the archmage Akelnar. It turned out that his magic was also in the forest, and Ariel simply could not know about it. However, if he hadn't got anything mixed up, the man she lived with was named Daniel. Thus, Cedric began to understand that Akelnar was his real name. This issue has been studied for a long time, and right now he is concerned with something completely different. He wants to know whether Akelnar and Ashildr were lovers, or whether she will deny it again. Rumors about this couple have become so distorted that they are now actually considered lovers. There is only one argument that easily destroys this stupid hypothesis and other nonsense. Archmage Akelnar, aka Daniel, is Ariel's brother. Many years ago, this talented wizard died in the war, defending his home. It is unlikely that this information will be useful for someone who is in the temple right now. This girl is called into the world in order to fulfill the prophecy she heard. At first, Lady Violet was simply carrying out her usual duties until she heard a strange voice. The voice says that an ominous aura has already thickened over the Imperial Palace. Meanwhile, life outside the temple goes on as usual, and the servants, as usual, spread gossip. Everyone around had long since gotten used to the fact that the Emperor would make a strange person his wife. Suddenly, they notice another candidate for the role of Empress. If everything is true, then Lady Violet has become a true saint, which means Cedric is obliged to marry her. Violet Kelton is known to be able to hear the voice of God and is a prime candidate. However, everything changed in the palace because the emperor had already decided on his choice of wife. Many years ago, Ariel and Daniel were ordinary brother and sister, the kind you meet in the thousands. The only difference was that both were excellent wizards. The girl had perfect command of freezing magic, while her brother controlled fire. They were brilliant magicians, but they fought just like everyone else. Everyone tried to prove their superiority by demonstrating their best skills. Sometimes a simple training session turned into a real fight. In this pair, the girl clearly did not give in, knowing her brother's most vulnerable points. The servants begged her not to be so rude, otherwise everything would end too badly. Eventually, the magical training turned into a regular fist fight. There was only one person in the house who could bring the enraged children to their senses. Mom never understood how brilliant wizards could fight each other. Instead of supporting each other, they start a massacre in the middle of the house. Of course, they had to apologize to their mother, and then to each other. Now Ariel remembers the past years with a smile, although back then everything seemed serious. She will never see her loved ones again, so her life is divided into two unequal parts. However, Cedric never heard what relation Akelnar and Ashildr were to each other. Not wanting to be an obedient doll, she advises him to find the answer to this question himself. If he has read so many books, he will easily find information in his notes. Every day, Cedric's pressure only increases, as if he intends to take revenge for everything. He knows very well that the girl was in the forest with a man named Akelnar. Moreover, he managed to find out that Daniel was that very wizard. Until the last moment, she kept this information a secret, but now there is no point in hiding it. The real reason for her silence is that Ariel doesn't want to feel too old. Usually grandmothers are about 90 years old, but she managed to live more than 1,000. Thus, Emperor Cedric is a whole 1,000 years younger than her. Ariel would be happy if he would just let her go back to her native forest. Then I wouldn't have to blush when telling my future husband my real age. Quietly opening the door, she suggests simply talking calmly without reproaches. Surprisingly, he had long been ready for such a conversation and wanted to suggest it himself. The girl admits that after spending time in the palace, she decided to return. The magic circle will remain intact, so Cedric will be able to come to the cabin at any time. We are talking about that very forest that he simply burned with a meteorite salvo. It's strange, but Cedric is convinced that there is nothing left in the Forest of Monsters for a long time. The spell to restore the hut won't help, because the servants have dismantled it down to the very foundations. Simply put, if she returns to the forest, she will find a huge burnt-out area. When Cedric brought her things, the wizards were amazed by the number of relics. It's hard to believe, but he even encroached on the most valuable thing that was once in the hut. All this time, the girl just watched as her personal belongings were carried past. But now she intends to return them before they are stolen by local wizards. All the books accumulated over 1,000 years have become available to the general public. With their help, magicians will be able to understand what century her magic belongs to. In addition, the notebooks contain not only magical notes but also personal ones. It is at this moment that one of Ariel's notebooks falls from the hands of a careless servant. This notebook is special. No girl will confuse her diary with other entries. You can give away anything, but not a personal diary with shameful notes. Of course, they don't know ancient writing, but that thought doesn't make it any easier. Ariel begs for at least this notebook to be returned, and everything else can be examined. He would probably be disgusted too if Cedric's personal diary were in the hands of strangers. The young emperor's silence for too long becomes suspicious. At some point, she realizes that modern scientists have already managed to decipher the language. In other words, they can easily read the writing as if it were their native language. Now the wizards intend to find out what kind of relationship the two ancient magicians had. At the same time, you can find out what people were thinking about at that time and what they preferred to write down. It seems I'll have to tell Cedric the whole truth, otherwise he'll find out about it himself. It feels like his gaze could kill a person if you looked at him for too long. Suddenly she declares that she never liked that nasty archmage Akelnar. She promises to continue developing this idea as soon as the diary is in her hands. If he wanted to give a special gift, returning the notebook would do just fine. It gets even more terrifying when wizards stumble upon an ancient curse word. It was a diary of curses directed at my brother, so it is filled with curses. And yet the young man was tired of constantly hearing the name of this man from the past. He once again asks her who the archmage really was. It is foolish to behave like an unreasonable child, because the Emperor is no longer a little boy. Besides, he had long ago guessed that the name Ashildr was Ariel's first name. In this case, the girl demands to know why he continues this performance. He prefers to hear such confessions personally from a person, even when he knows the truth. After all, there is nothing shameful in the fact that Ariel once had a loved one. She already asked to continue the conversation a little later, otherwise the magicians would read the diary to the end. Judging by their reaction, the wizards would never part with the valuable artifact. Only Ansel can handle this. This guy knows how to easily convince people. If they start to complain, you should take the rest of the things found in the Forest of Monsters. Rather than losing everything, it's better to simply return one diary, preserving the most valuable finds. 2 minutes later, the diary was in the hands of someone who had long dreamed of getting it. As is known, Ariel herself taught Cedric to read textbooks in the ancient language. However, the content of the textbooks is different, and Ariel demands that the notebook be returned to its owner. He became so tall that even when jumping, she was unable to reach her property. This is no longer funny. The girl is asking him to immediately give back something that does not belong to him. She promises to return to the forest immediately if he dares to read even one line. It seems that this is her favorite method of getting her way, simply burning bridges behind her. He had long understood that by running away from people, she was getting rid of them as an extra burden. 10 years ago, the girl blocked the magic seal with the same ease. It must be admitted that the young emperor is holding back quite a bit from responding. Those 10 long years when she left Cedric did not seem like one day to him. There were moments of complete despair when the magic circle refused to connect with the forest. However, having plucked up his courage, the young man decided to personally go into the forest through the crowd of monsters. At that moment, he vowed that one day he would be able to make his way to the hut and meet her there. And here Ariel is, no longer hidden by the magic of the forest and the crowd of living trees. Having found the girl, he intended to kill her and all the monsters guarding the eastern forest. If something doesn't belong to you, it's better to just get rid of it forever. After such revenge, there will be no trace left in the memory of the witch who abandoned the prince. These were his thoughts 10 years ago, and it is strange that Cedric still has not fulfilled the oath. Over time, plans changed, because as he grew older, he gained wisdom and experience. You could say Ariel was very lucky that they didn't meet a couple of years ago. However, now he just wants to lock her in the palace, keeping her by his side forever. The Emperor will only allow her to live if she breathes only in his arms. She would have to live locked up in the farthest room so that only he could admire her face. For the last time, the guy asks not to get angry with him until he changes his plans. In the end, he will be justly rewarded for his patience. She should enjoy life in the imperial palace, where she will become the mistress. After listening to the confessions, she again reminds him about the diary, which is still in someone else's hands. He simply has to return it if he plans to live with Ariel for many years. You can simply burn it so that the memories of the past turn to ashes. Then this notebook will not go to anyone, and this will be a completely reasonable solution to the problem. Cedric likes the idea, and a second later the notebook burns in a magical flame. Wizards will definitely cry like children when they see the ancient relic damaged. As she promised, Ariel immediately confesses that Daniel is her brother. For some reason, he thinks that the girl killed her brother, because there are always wars between relatives. A strange assumption, considering that Ariel never encroached on someone else's life. And yet, the story about the family relationship was not too much of a secret. She could have said this much earlier instead of making a mystery out of a simple fact. The main thing is that they were not lovers, which cannot but please the Emperor. The meaningful look with which he looked at the girl could not be confused with anything else. Cedric is so pleased with the news that he could return the diary if it were intact. The frequent mention of this archmage Akelnar seriously hurt his pride. If they turned out to be a couple, he was ready to dig up his ashes and then burn them. Cedric could even resurrect this man and then personally send him to the next world. But since we are talking about his own brother, he is ready to take pity and leave the magician's soul in peace. However, he asks that important facts, such as his great past, no longer be hidden. The name of the great sorceress should be something to be proud of, not hidden like a terrible secret. Ariel is an outstanding magician who left behind many achievements. At this moment, the girl decides to admit something that is not a source of pride. After all, among all the achievements, one perfect deed was not recorded. Cedric would hardly have been able to learn about it from scientists who do not have such information. He asks her to finish the conversation if she is still hiding some secret. Perhaps by talking about this out loud, the girl will be able to ease her soul. In response, she reminds us that the world that existed 1,000 years ago was somewhat different. It was irreparably damaged, resulting in the deaths of many innocent people. The blood of these people was shed due to the fault of one inexperienced sorceress. And he knows very well the name of that sinner who destroyed the whole world with her own hands. 1,000 years ago, every corner of the earth was another field for brutal slaughter. The Chalcian Empire and the Republic of Crodal have joined forces against the Kingdom of Arundel. At first, many objected, considering war a last resort. Moreover, it is impossible to defeat an alliance of two powerful states without a large army. Daniel looked at the matter much more simply, because their army was filled with experienced magicians. At that time, Ariel supported her brother, believing in the strength of her brothers in arms. She personally summoned all the high-level wizards who possessed long-range magic. As a result, many wizards came to the war, whose faces she never saw again. As members of the royal family, the brother and sister were also required to participate in the battle. Using more powerful energy than anyone else, they destroyed all the kingdom's enemies. The war spread quickly and brutally, turning cities into burning ruins. At some point, there was not a single house left untouched by the magical flame. But time passed, and gradually the girl began to understand that she had done something irreparable. Before, she had only seen foreign lands, flooded with blood and engulfed in fire. This time, she was about to see the horror of war reaching her own home. Unable to comprehend what has happened, Ariel falls to the hot ground. Everything turned to ashes. That's how the most powerful magical flame works. Nothing remained but charred corpses and what was once a thriving city. My mother, father, brother, and also my sister, who spoke out against the war, were killed. The end of the war seemed completely different to her, in which they would triumphantly enter enemy territory. Instead, the war took away those closest to her, leaving the girl completely alone. It is impossible to imagine the pain that a person experiences when he or she has lost all of his or her loved ones. Because of her foolish overconfidence, something happened that Ariel will regret for the rest of her days. Left alone in the ruined city, she only continued to cry in despair, until the dimension gate nearby opened right in front of her. Previously, she had only encountered such things in magic textbooks, but now it was as if she had seen the universe. Only after losing everything did she realize that it was all just a trick of another dimension. It turned out that in another dimension, the god of the damned Chalcion has long existed. The gates, once open to wizards, now benefit the wrong creatures. Ariel decided to permanently block the portal leading to the evil deity's dimension. It's not just about gates, but about all possible ways of moving between worlds. This is the only way to guarantee that this monstrous war will not happen again. Fortunately, she had enough power to carry out her intended plan of destruction. Almost immediately after the activation of destructive magic, the seal began to close. As a result, all portals leading to other dimensions were permanently blocked. Ariel nearly died after using up all her life force on the closing magic. It was her own price for saving innocent people. It's a pity that only after we make a mistake do we learn of its terrible consequences. Thus, the dimensional gates were sealed and the communication between dimensions was blocked. She used roughly the same magic to block the flow from Cedric's world. This happened much later, when the girl had already started a new life in the forest. The time spent there prevented beings from other dimensions from setting foot on her land. It's safe to say that Ariel could have easily avoided this. Then her parents would have stayed alive, and she wouldn't have had to lock herself in the forest of monsters. Ariel still considers herself a sinner who should go back. There she can atone for her guilt by hiding the seal from the interference of other beings. Cedric had no idea how many heavy secrets were kept in this girl's heart. Before, he really didn't want to let her out of the imperial palace. But after hearing this story, it is simply impossible to remain an indifferent stone. He orders Ansel to get ready to leave. It looks like they have a long journey ahead of them. If necessary, the advisor can take the best magicians from the Imperial Laboratory with him. However, there is a special offer for Ariel if she is ready to see something beautiful. She will be interested to know how much the outside world has changed outside the palace. Cedric is ready to become her personal guide, revealing the beauty of the modern world. This is the very place that the sorceress destroyed 1,000 years ago. The truth is, the world is no longer the charred ruins of her memories. Ariel asks him to explain where he intends to take her this time. If this place is so wonderful, it would be better to tell about it before leaving. The Emperor's mood changed so quickly that it seems a little suspicious. However, if Cedric shows her the local beauty, she will be able to calm her soul a little. At this moment, the girl realizes that the world has become even more amazing than before. The roads were beautifully laid, and the capital's buildings were striking in their beauty. There were so many people everywhere, as if there was a holiday in the city today. It is clear that life in the empire flourished despite the war that had just ended. Not only one part, but the whole city was in excellent condition. With this walk, Cedric only wanted to show that the world had long since changed and forgotten the horrors of the past.